We're going to look at conditional flow in Python, and we're going to look at if statements, if and else as a default, and how that works in Python, along with some comparisons that we can do. So I'm going to declare a variable. This is going to be a equals 1, and I will do if a is less than 2, which it will be, then I'll do my colon, indent. So on this next line is where I'm going to start my statement, and I'll just print out the value here. So a is less than 2. So if the condition passes, this should print out. I'll go ahead and run that, and you can see that's what we get printed out. Now, it's not necessary that I have the parentheses, so I can go ahead and run this again, and we get the same thing. If my comparison got a little bit more complex, then I might want to use the parentheses to help to group things and to make it a little bit more readable. So now I can go ahead and add another comparison. What I want to do is add a default. So I want an else. I'll add my colon again. So at the default, there's no comparison. This is just what it drops into if the first comparison fails. So in that case, I'm going to say default. And then this here, I am going to let fail. And I'll run that. We get our default. Now we want to go ahead and add an else if and do that comparison. So I am going to go ahead and comment out the else, move it down here, and add the else if up here. So I can do else colon carriage return. I've got my indent here as well. I'll say if a is equal to 1. So you'll notice we also have our equality operator here. So we're using two equal signs for this comparison to see if a is equal to 1. Then I would add my other colon and go ahead and print this out. And I'll say a equals 1 and run that. So you can see here we get a failure. Now we've got all our indenting going on, but what happened? This is actually similar to what we did here. Notice last time our else was not indented. So I'm going to go ahead and move this back one and run that now. And you can see we get our correct output, even though we're indented way over here. So if I want to clean that up a little bit, I can just move it back. So this kind of syntax here is a little bit verbose. It's going with else. Then I declare my if, and I could just keep chaining this. A better way, a more concise way, in fact, to do this is to use the elif. And that will look like this. So I just do that, and then I can go ahead and bring this back one. Now I can run this, and I get the same output. So you can see it's a little bit easier to maintain, and I can go ahead and add another, a little bit easier to maintain and also read. So if a is equal to 0, I can go ahead and print this out, and then I'll change that to 0, and we get a equals to 0. Now what I'm going to do is bring my else back into the picture, and going to go ahead and let this fall through. So I want actually a is going to be equal to 5, and I'll run that, and we get our default. So that's a good example of chaining all of this together. Let's look at what if we have a comparison such as elif a is less than or equal to 5. So something like this. And run that and see what happens. So we get our a equals 0, which I guess we can make a little bit more accurate and just change it to 5. But I'm going to add another comparison so we can see this as well. So a is equal to or greater than 6, and I'll go ahead and update our output to match and then run this. So you can see now we're getting a syntax error. So it would seem intuitive that we could do it that way, but actually we need to do this. And there we have it, our output. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It would seem as though following what we did earlier, this would be the way to do it, but in fact, it is like that. So next is a common structure in languages called a switch statement. And the switch statement follows something like this, where you have a switch, you do a comparison here, and then you would have a case, some constant, and then you could go ahead and do whatever you wanted, and you could keep running these cases. The thing is, in Python, that doesn't actually exist. So we don't have a switch statement available to us. There's workarounds that people do, basically creating a function or using dictionaries to simulate what a switch statement does, but I'm not going to get into all those here. Just be aware that it doesn't actually exist in Python. And to simulate the switch using comparison operators, you can just keep chaining your elifs together, and that's going to do something very similar to what a switch would do. And then, of course, like a switch has a default, we have a default here that we can fall out of our conditions only in the situation that all of this fails as well. So that is how you do control flow in Python.